Hello friends, welcome to the HFY Ode, where we bring you new science fiction stories, a new world, a new adventure. And yes, there is no robotic or AI voices here, only real human voices with real human touch. So let's start this journey, and please subscribe my channel if you like the stories and press the bell icon for the latest updates. Let's have a story. Okay.
The conclave of species had a word for Earth, Duvari. It didn't translate cleanly. It never did with conclave words, but the closest rendering in standard was somewhere between quaint and doomed. A small blue planet in a mid-tier system, unremarkable gravitational pull, dangerously thin atmosphere by galactic standards, populated by a species that had, bafflingly, not yet managed to extinction event itself despite every reasonable projection suggesting they should have done so at least 3 times by now. Humanity had been admitted to the Galactic Interspecies Academy on a provisional basis. That was the polite way of saying it. The impolite way, and the Vethkai, who were constitutionally incapable of politeness, said it plainly, was that humanity had been admitted because refusing them was getting embarrassing. They kept showing up. They kept applying. They kept sending letters of appeal written in 17 different languages, all of which said essentially the same thing. We are ready. Please let us in. We have been ready for 40 years. At what point exactly does provisional become permanent? Headmaster Dovrin Isol, a Thulan who had administered the academy for 60 of his 300-year lifespan, had finally relented in the 412th year of the institution's operation. He had read the 43rd letter of appeal from the Human Interplanetary Council, set it down on his desk made of pollution moonwood, and said to his assistant, "Process their application. If they die on the orientation trials, at least they'll stop writing." His assistant, a young Vethkai named Scrix, who had the organizational capacity of a small supercomputer and the emotional range of a filing cabinet, had processed the application without comment. That was how Mara Vasquez ended up standing in the Academy's intake hall on a Tuesday. Humans still used Tuesdays, which the other species found charming, in the way one finds a child's drawing of a spaceship charming. With 43 other cadets from 11 different species, all of whom were taller than her, most of whom outmassed her by a factor of 2 or 3, and several of whom were regarding her with the particular expression that said, "I did not know they let your kind in here." She was 22 years old. She had a backpack that was, frankly, too full. She had dark eyes that catalogued everything in a room before she'd taken 3 steps into it. She had a scar on her left forearm from a rock climbing incident at 14 that she'd never had corrected because her mother said scars told stories, and she figured her mother was right about most things. She also had, tucked into the left hip pocket of her uniform, a small laminated photograph of her family, a granola bar, and a utility knife that she'd somehow gotten through 3 separate security checkpoints because humans, and this was something the Academy's security staff had not fully processed yet. Humans have an absolutely preternatural talent for getting blades through checkpoints. It's not malicious. It's not even intentional. It's just that they've been making and carrying cutting tools for 2 million years, and the instinct is, apparently, deeply structural. The intake orientation was conducted by Proctor Velharin, an Aketh, tall, 6-limbed, bioluminescent patches along the jaw that pulsed a calm administrative blue. He had processed 43 intake cohorts. He had, in that time, seen species weep, faint, attempt to flee, attempt to fight each other, and on one memorable occasion, spontaneously enter a hibernation state due to orientation-related stress. He had never had a human cadet before. He looked at Mara Vasquez. She looked back at him. She was eating the granola bar. "Cadet Vasquez," he said, "orientation begins in 4 minutes. Please finish your..." He consulted his translator. "Crunchy compressed oat block." "Sure," she said. "You want some? I've got another one." The Keth behind her, a male named Hrak Sovan, who was approximately the size of a small vehicle and had a stress response that manifested as involuntary bioluminescent flashing. Flashed once, in what Vel Harren recognized as the Keth equivalent of startled laughter. Vel Harren did not take the granola bar. He began the orientation. The Academy's survival curriculum was built around one central premise. You will encounter environments that want to kill you. The training was tiered. First-year cadets completed 12 planetary rotations across environments of escalating hostility. The environments were classified on the Dorvani Hostility Index, a scale from 1 to 10. 1 was a mild weather-temperate planet with no apex predators and potable surface water. In 10 was a Class Omega designation that the Academy only used in theoretical exercises because sending cadets to a DHI 10 environment was considered by most species legal frameworks something in the vicinity of murder. The 12-rotation curriculum topped out at DHI 6. The final trial, the one that washed out roughly 30% of cadets, the one that determined whether you moved into second year or went home with a polite letter and a small commemorative medal, was conducted on a DHY 7 world. DHY 7 meant multiple apex predator species. Atmospheric particulate requiring respiratory filtration above 40% exertion. Temperature variance of 60 degrees across a standard rotation cycle. No safe water without treatment. Geological instability. And on Serath 4, which was the specific DHI 7 world the Academy had been using for 30 years. One additional feature that the index didn't have a clean number for, the fauna adapts. Serath 4's ecosystem had evolved under conditions of extraordinary predatory pressure. Everything on it that survived did so by being faster, smarter, and more aggressive than everything else. The predators didn't just hunt, they learned. They adjusted to new prey. The Academy's researchers had documented 17 distinct behavioral adaptations in Kerath's apex species across the 30 years of trial use. The creatures were, by any reasonable metric, getting better at hunting cadets. This was considered an acceptable feature of the curriculum. Mara found out about Serath 4 in the third week of her first semester. And sitting in a xenobiology lecture hall between Hraksovan, who she had, against all social logic, befriended on the basis of the granola bar incident, and a subsequent conversation about the comparative tensile strength of their respective homeworlds' building materials, and a Vethkai cadet named Skeel Ra, who was small, fastidiously organized, and regarded the human with the intensity of something trying to solve an equation. The lecturer, Professor Maun, was a Thulan, old, which for Thulans meant ancient, skin the color of deep-sea sediment, voice like gravel through a pipe organ. Serath 4, he said, pulling up the holographic display. The planet rotated slowly in the center of the room. Green-gray, mostly landmass. Your final rotation, DHI 7. You will be dropped in teams of 4. You will carry standard-issue survival equipment, if food concentrates for 40 standard hours, and your personal communicator. Extraction occurs at the 60-hour mark, provided you have reached the designated extraction point. He paused. Teams are assigned by species compatibility for atmospheric and dietary requirements. Mara raised her hand. Maun looked at her. Thulans had 3 eyes, and all 3 managed to convey mild skepticism simultaneously. Cadet Vasquez, what's the washout rate for Serath specifically? 31%, across 30 years of use. And what's the... She checked her notes. What's the mortality rate? The room got quiet. Not the polite quiet of a lecture, but the particular quiet of 40-some species who had all just had the same thought. It did not occur to us to ask that. Maun was quiet for a moment too. The Academy does not release that data to cadets, which was not the same as 0, and Mara Vasquez had been doing math since before she could reach the countertops. She wrote something in her notebook. Skeel Ra, next to her, angled precisely 18 degrees to read it. It said, "Find out anyway." Skeel Ra straightened back up. The Vethkai didn't have human facial expressions. Their emotive signals ran through the chromatic patterning in their secondary membrane. But the faint gold that pulsed once through their jaw said, in Vethkai social language, something close to, "I think I understand you now." The teams were posted 6 weeks before the Kereth trial. Mara's team, herself, Hraksovan, and a Pelusian cadet named Ethis, whose species communicated partly through subsonic vibration and partly through an extremely expressive set of secondary eyelids, and a Duvari-class observer, which was the Academy's term for a species admitted on provisional status, meaning in this case, herself. She was, technically, the observer, the one the others were supposed to be watching. Hraksovan read the team assignment and flashed a slow, warm amber across his jaw plates. In Keth, amber meant something like good. This is good. He had, by this point, had 7 months of watching Mara Vasquez do things that violated his priors about small, soft creatures without exoskeletons. He had recalibrated accordingly. Ethis, by contrast, subsonic vibrated something that Mara's translator rendered as, "I have researched the human's homeworld." That I request clarification on whether standard survival protocols account for significant behavioral deviance in Duvari-class species. It took Mara a second to realize she was the behavioral deviance in question. "I'll take that as a compliment," she said. Ethis's secondary eyelids did something complicated. The remaining question was equipment. Standard issue survival pack, filtration mask, emergency thermal wrap, concentrated food tabs, water purifier, signal beacon, a short-range stunner. Every cadet got the same kit. Every cadet except, as it turned out, Mara. Because in the week before the trial, she submitted a formal equipment substitution request through the Academy's supply office, citing DHI-7 environmental research and homeworld-specific metabolic requirements. The supply officer, Noah Keth named Brev Taran, who had been processing cadet equipment requests for 20 years, approved it without reading it carefully because the paperwork was formatted correctly and the human's writing style had a quality he couldn't name, but that made him feel vaguely like it would be fine. She swapped out one of her 2 thermal wraps for a length of braided wire. She kept the food tabs. She added, through a separate request, 2 additional water purification tablets beyond the standard allocation. The request cited her species' higher hydration requirements. This was true. It was also, in this specific case, not the only reason. She packed a small tin of something called instant coffee, which she had flagged as a dietary necessity on her intake forms, and which the Academy's nutritional staff had approved without investigation, because they were trying to be culturally accommodating. And the human had very earnestly explained that her cognitive function declined measurably without it. This was also true. Hraksovan watched her pack. He had been watching her prepare for the trial for 3 weeks now, with the low-grade bewilderment of someone watching a creature much smaller than himself do something that kept not going wrong. "You are not afraid," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was closer to a question. Mara looked up from her pack. Thought about it honestly, the way she always did when Hrak asked her something real. "I'm afraid," she said. "I'm just also..." She searched for the word interested. Hraksovan's bioluminescence pulsed a colour she'd learned to read over 7 months. The deep teal that meant I cannot tell if you are the bravest thing I have met or the least intelligent thing I have met, and I am no longer sure those are different. She zipped the pack. "Let's go see a Deathworld," she said. Serath 4 from orbit looked like a bruise. Green-grey continents bleeding into brown-grey oceans, cloud systems moving in tight vortex patterns that the pilot pointed out were endemic to the atmospheric pressure differentials across the land masses. "Drop zone is northern continent, sector 7. The pilot, a Thulan, 200 years old, voice like she'd heard worse, said. "Extraction point is 40 kilometers northeast, 60 hours. Don't be late." The drop pod seated 4. Mara sat with her pack on her lap because she'd packed it too full to fit in the overhead compartment, which Hraksovan had noticed and said nothing about because he'd also noticed that every single thing in that pack had been chosen with a specific, non-obvious purpose, and he'd stopped second-guessing her packing strategies around month 3. Ethis subsonic hummed something below the translator threshold. Mara felt it in her sternum. She'd learned to read the ones that came through physically rather than through the device. "We are going to die here," this one said. "We're not," she said. The pod hit atmosphere. Serath 4's gravity was 1.3 standard. Noticeable, the kind of weight that settled into your joints over time and reminded you it was there. The air hit when they opened the pod hatch. Thick, particulate heavy, carrying the specific mineral smell of a world that had never been bothered to clean itself up for visitors. The filtration masks went on immediately. Mara's went on last because she'd taken a long, deliberate breath first. Sovan stared at her. "Calibrating," she said. "You want to know what you're dealing with." The northern continent of Kerath 4 spread out around them like something that had decided to be hostile as a philosophical stance. Vegetation in deep greens and blacks, growing in dense formations that the pre-drop briefing had described as low visibility, high ambush potential terrain. The ground was uneven. Root structures breaching the surface, rock formations jutting at angles that suggested the geology here had opinions. The sky was a yellowish grey, 2 moons visible even in daylight, both on the smaller side. Mara stood at the edge of the pod's landing site, looked northeast, and pulled out a compass. An actual compass. Magnetic needle, sealed case, probably 40 years old. Sovan stared at it. The navigator function on the communicator. "Works on battery," Mara said. "Battery fails when you're cold and stressed and exerting because the drain goes up. Compass works on physics." She took a bearing. "We go that way." They went that way. The first 6 hours were, by Serath standards, gentle. The team moved through the dense vegetation in reasonable formation, Sovan on point because of his size and exoskeletal durability, Mara behind him because she'd asked to be. What Ethos and the fourth? She was thinking of the Pelusian, and she was thinking also of the thing she hadn't said out loud yet, which was that she'd read every published research paper on Kerath 4's apex fauna that was available in the Academy's database, and there was a behavioural pattern in the hunting cycles that the briefing materials glossed over, and she wanted to watch for it before she said anything. At hour 7, she saw it. Movement in the canopy. Not random. Tracking. She put her hand up. The team stopped. "What?" Ethos started. She pointed. Silence. Then Sovan saw it too. The slow, deliberate repositioning of something large in the branches above and to the left, staying at a consistent distance, adjusting when they adjusted. "It's learning our speed," she thought. The briefing had called it the Serath Predator, and which was the most aggressively unhelpful name in xenobiology. The research papers called it Dorvani Maximus Kerath. Apex, ambush type, pack coordinated, adaptive. The adaptive part was the piece nobody talked about carefully enough. Not just that the species adapted across generations, that individuals adapted within a hunt. It was watching them now to learn their pace before it coordinated the strike. Mara reached into her pack. She pulled out the braided wire. Sovan's bioluminescence went a questioning yellow. "I need about 10 minutes, she said. "Keep moving at exactly the same pace. Don't look up." "What are you?" "Exactly the same pace," she said. "Trust me." She dropped back. The creature in the canopy adjusted to compensate. She let it think it had her. For the thing about predators that adapt by watching their prey, and Mara had read this in the 3rd research paper, the one authored by a Thulan xenobiologist named Drell Sovan, who had apparently spent 30 years being more honest in footnotes than in abstracts, is that the adaptation is a vulnerability as much as a strength. You learn a pace, you commit to it, you build a coordinated strike around it. Change the pace, and you've broken the model. She didn't change her pace. She changed what was at her pace. The wire came off her pack in a continuous loop, tied at intervals to the vegetation at roughly her shoulder height, which, on Serath 4, meant roughly the height of the lower canopy's strike zone. She worked fast, not frantic. Her hands were steady. She'd tied knots since she was 7 in the mountains east of her hometown. her father standing behind her saying again, in the specific patient voice that meant he trusted her more than she trusted herself. The knots she was building now were not her father's knots. They were something she'd worked out in the 2 weeks after reading Drell Sauvin's footnote in her dorm room, with the length of cord she kept there for reasons she'd described on her intake forms as occupational hobby. The wire ran back to a loop around a root mass at ground level. She rejoined the group, her pace unchanged. Hrak Sauvan glanced at her. She held up 3 fingers. 3 minutes later, the canopy above the wire line erupted. Not above them. 20 meters back. The creature, and she got her first real look at it as it thrashed. The 300 kilograms of evolved aggression tangled in a wire designed to catch exactly the angle and speed of its strike. Was longer than she'd expected, 6 limbs, mottled grey-green, the kind of animal that had never in its evolutionary history met something it couldn't process. It was processing this now. The sounds it made were not happy sounds. "Move," Mara said. "Steady pace, northeast, don't run." "Why don't we run?" Ethos vibrated. "Because it has pack members and running triggers, chase instinct. Steady pace reads as non-prey. We stay non-prey until we're out of range." Hrak Sauvan moved. His bioluminescence had gone a deep, involuntary violet that Mara had never seen on him before. She filed it for later. She was always filing Hrak Sauvan's color shifts for later, building a dictionary, or because she liked him, and she wanted to understand him well enough to know when he was actually scared versus when he was performing not scared. This was actually scared. "Vasquez," he said, low as they moved, "how did you know the strike angle?" Paper by Drell Sauvan. 74 publication, footnote 11. He described an observed strike in passive monitoring footage and noted the angle was consistent across 14 recorded hunts. Nobody followed up on it. She paused. The footnote was 12 lines long. The abstract didn't mention it. "You read footnotes?" "I read everything." She checked the compass. On bearing. "My grandmother read everything. She said the information people bury is more interesting than the information they lead with." The violet in Hrak's bioluminescence cooled, slowly, toward the teal she knew better. They walked. To hour 14. The temperature dropped 17 degrees in 40 minutes, which was on the briefing sheet, but experiencing it was different from reading about it. The kind of cold that didn't ask permission, that came in through your joints and your sinuses and the gap between your collar and your jaw. Everyone's filtration masks fogged at the edges. The vegetation thinned as they moved into a rockfield zone, which was better visibility and worse cover and a different kind of anxiety. Aethys was struggling. Pelusians ran warm-blooded but narrow. Their thermal regulation was efficient within a range and punishing outside it. Mara watched the secondary eyelids droop and the subsonic vibrations get shorter, clipped. She stopped. 5 minutes, she said. We should maintain pace to reach. Hrak started. 5 minutes. She was already pulling the thermal wrap out, not hers. The extra one she'd gotten approved by citing species-specific metabolic requirements. She wrapped it around Ethys without asking, which was the only way to do it without getting a 10-minute conversation about whether it was necessary. Ethys blinked the secondary eyelids once. Something warm in it. You brought 2, Hrak said. I brought 3, Mara said. 1 standard issue, 1 approved substitution, 1 that I technically listed as a secondary filtration layer on the manifest but is functionally a thermal wrap. She looked at him. The manifest was accurate. It is a secondary filtration layer. It's also a thermal wrap. These things aren't mutually exclusive. The deep teal pulsed. That is very human of you. I'll take that as a compliment. They rested 5 minutes. Ethys stabilized. They moved. The water source they found at hour 19 was, by Serath 4 standards, excellent. A surface runoff pool fed by a rock formation that had been filtering particulate for geological ages. By any other standard, it was a brownish-grey basin of liquid with a surface sheen and the smell of wet minerals and something organic she didn't want to name. Mara ran it through the purifier. Standard protocol. Then she dropped a second tablet. Double treatment? Hraksovan asked. Paper 6, Drelsovan again. There's a microbial load in Serath's northern continent water sources that's at the upper tolerance limit of standard issue purifiers at 19% above specification. Standard treatment clears it. A double treatment gives you margin if the tablet is degraded from temperature variance. She paused. It's probably fine with single. I just prefer margins. You read 6 papers. 11. 6 were useful. She handed the treated water to Ethos first, who took it without the subsonic commentary they'd been making since hour 4. The commentary, which translated roughly as a continuous low-grade, "this is not survivable," "I have made calculations. The calculations say we are going to die here," had been getting quieter over the course of the day. Not because the situation was less dangerous, because Ethos was, Mara thought, slowly updating their calculations. The 4th team member, she should say his name. She'd been thinking of him as the 4th because there was something she hadn't resolved about him yet. Threven. A Keth. So like Hraksovan, but younger, and with a different response profile. Hraksovan went violet when scared and worked through it. Threven went still. A deep, locked-up stillness that Mara had learned to watch because stillness in a crisis was sometimes composure and sometimes the specific kind of freeze that preceded collapse. He'd been still since hour 3. At hour 20, she sat down next to him at the water stop. "Tell me something true," she said. He looked at her. Young, even for a Keth. Bioluminescence flat and dim. The color of something trying not to be read. "What?" "Something true. Anything. Tell me your mother's name. Tell me what you ate for breakfast before we dropped. Tell me the worst joke you know." She was watching him. "I'm not trying to... I just want to hear you say something real." A long pause. My clutch mother's name is Veth Haran," he said. "She told me before I left for the academy that she'd never had a clutch sibling come back from a trial like this." He paused. "She meant it as encouragement. She didn't think you'd be the exception." "No, she thought..." He stopped, recalculated. She thought the attempt was the thing that mattered, that coming back wasn't the point. Mara was quiet for a moment. She thought about her own mother, who had driven her to the intake shuttle and held both her hands in the parking lot and said very clearly, "You come back. Not the attempt, the thing itself. Come back. Different philosophies of love." "We're coming back," she said. The flatness in Threven's bioluminescence shifted. A small movement. A faint, cautious blue. The color of something not sure yet but willing to be uncertain about it. "How do you know?" "Because I've read 11 papers and made enough margin that I'm allowed to know." She stood up. "Also, I'm not done being interested in this planet yet, and I don't plan on leaving before I'm done." The cautious blue held. Hour 29 brought the geological event the briefing sheet had mentioned with the specific vagueness of potential tectonic activity in northern Sector 7, which translated, in practice, to the ground deciding to disagree with itself about its arrangement. Not an earthquake. Kerath's crust was too thick for clean seismic events. More like a ground shrug, a 40-meter section of terrain ahead of them heaving upward in slow, grinding stages. Which meant their direct route to the extraction point was now a rock wall that hadn't existed in any of the pre-drop mapping. Hraksovan assessed it in the way Keth assessed most physical obstacles, which was to say, he looked at it and calculated whether he could go through it. He determined he probably could not. The determination cost him something. Ethos began the subsonic again. Lower frequency this time. Worried. Threven's blue went flat. Mara walked up to the wall and put her hand on it. Warm. Active. Still settling. The new rock face was fractured in a diagonal pattern running from lower left to upper right. Classic stress fracture formation. She'd seen this in photographs of the Cascade Range. And she'd seen it in person the summer she was 16, and her father had taken her up a route she was technically not certified for yet, because you'll be certified before we come down. She ran her hand along the fracture. We can go up, she said. That surface is unstable, Hraxovan said. If it shifts while we're on it, it'll shift whether we're on it or not. The question is whether we're on the upside or the downside when it does. She was looking at the fracture line, tracing the load-bearing ribs with her eyes. The fracture gives us purchase. The settling means the face is expanding outward at the base, which means there are grip points being created in real time. She turned to them. I'm going first. I'll call placements. Hraxovan made a sound she'd never heard from him. A low, resonant thing, below the translator threshold. What does that mean? She asked. It is not a word, he said. It is the sound Keth make when they are about to follow someone somewhere they cannot calculate the outcome. Good sound? Another pause. It means we trust the one leading. She climbed. The face was exactly what she'd predicted. Unstable in the right ways, the fracture line running true, the grip points good where she'd read them, and surprising in two places where the geology had been more generous than she'd expected. She called placements down to Hraxovan, who relayed them to the others, who came up one at a time with the careful, deliberate trust of people doing something they could not fully understand but were choosing to do anyway. As Aethys had the worst time of it. Pelusian limb proportions weren't built for vertical surfaces. But Mara positioned herself on a lateral shelf halfway up and talked them through it, grip point by grip point, in a running narration that was part instruction and part something else, something that had no clinical name, but that most humans would recognize as the specific calm voice of someone who has decided, structurally, that you are going to make it. They crested the top as the second moon came up. The view was... it was something. Serath IV spreading out ahead of them, ugly and hostile, and aggressively indifferent to their survival. And also, in the low double moon light, genuinely, stubbornly beautiful in the way that places that don't perform beauty tend to be. All that violence, and it had made something that looked like this, something you couldn't frame, something that just sat there being what it was. Mara sat down at the crest. She pulled the tin of instant coffee out of her pack. She had one small heating cell, one cup, enough water for a single serving. She made the coffee. Hraxovan sat next to her. His bioluminescence had gone back to warm amber. He watched her pour the hot water. He watched her stir it. He watched her wrap both hands around the cup the way humans do, like they're taking something from it beyond the temperature. What is that doing for you? He asked. She thought about it. The honest answer was, almost nothing physical. The caffeine load in instant coffee is subtherapeutic and I've been running on adrenaline for 14 hours. The honest answer was also, something my father made at 4 a.m. on every early start. As something that smells like starting, like before the hard thing, like you're about to go and you're ready. It's a ritual, she said. Rituals tell your nervous system what's happening. Right now, mine needs to know this is a rest point. A silence. Humans run on ritual, Hraxovan said. It was not a question. Humans run on a lot of things, she said. Ritual, stubbornness, embarrassing commitment to people we've decided matter. She took a sip. Coffee. Another silence. Then Threven, quietly, from his spot 2 meters away, said, Cadet Vasquez. Mara, she said. Mara. He tried it. His bioluminescence was a steady, soft blue now, nothing cautious about it. Just blue. My clutch mother said the attempt was the thing that mattered. You said. I did not agree with her, he said. I wanted to come back. I was afraid to say so because it seemed, he searched for the word, small, wanting the particular outcome rather than the noble effort. Mara looked at him. It's not small, she said. Wanting to come back is the whole point. The blue held. It held for the rest of the rest period, all 30 minutes of it, which was exactly as long as Mara had calculated they could afford, timed against the extraction window and the remaining distance and the known behavioral cycles of Serath's nocturnal fauna. She stood up when the 30 minutes were done. 31 hours to extraction, she said. We're ahead of pace. She shouldered her pack. Let's go see what else this planet's got. Ethis subsonic vibrated something. The translator took a moment. I have updated my calculations, it said. It did not say what the new number was. But the secondary eyelids were open, fully, in a way they hadn't been since the drop. Hour 41. 19 hours to extraction, and the planet decided it wasn't done making its arguments. The storm came in from the western rock formations in a way that the pre-drop meteorological data had rated as low probability, northern sector, standard rotation cycle. Low probability, not zero. Mara had noted the probability when she read the brief and had not mentioned it to her team because there was a version of preemptive catastrophizing that didn't help anyone. And there was a version of preparation that looked, from the outside, like she was just building a second thermal wrap into the pack manifest. She had built the second thermal wrap into the pack manifest. Had the storm hit with a specific kind of violence that Serath's atmosphere produced out of the pressure differential between its two temperature zones. Not wind exactly, more like the atmosphere deciding to reorganize itself using their position as the organizing principle. Horizontal particulate temperature drop of another 12 degrees in under 10 minutes, visibility down to roughly 8 meters. Formation, Mara said. She didn't raise her voice. There was a pitch that carried in a storm, and a pitch that got eaten by it, and she'd learned the difference young, on a mountain with her father, when the weather came in, ahead of the forecast. Harak on the windward side, Threven on the lee. Ethis middle. I'm front, hands on shoulders. Move. The formation moved, and this was the part that was hard to explain to people who hadn't been in it. And she would try to explain it later, she knew, in the debrief, to people whose faces would go careful and skeptical. The formation moved not because anyone had been drilled on storm movement tactics in the academy curriculum. It moved because 4 individuals had spent 41 hours building, incrementally and without ceremony, the kind of trust that lets you put your hand on someone's shoulder in the dark and believe that the ground knowledge in the person ahead of you is sufficient, and move forward, and not look down. She navigated by compass and by the rock formations she'd been cataloguing for the last 6 hours. There was a ridge system running northeast that she'd noted as a windbreak and calculated the bearing from and filed in her head in the same way she filed everything, with the patient ongoing confidence that it would matter eventually. It mattered now. The windbreak ridge materialized out of the particulate at exactly the bearing she'd held, a long, serrated wall of rock that broke the worst of the storm and gave them a survivable corridor along its base. She called a halt. They pressed against the rock. The temperature was brutal. Ethis was shaking. She pulled out the third thermal wrap, the one she'd listed as a secondary filtration layer. She put it around Ethis and Thraven both, and which required them to be closer together than Keth social protocols generally recommended for non-clutch family members, and Thraven made a sound that was not in the translator. I know, she said. Warmth first, social calibration later. Threven's bioluminescence fired a startled, involuntary gold. The Keth laugh response, same one Hrak had given her in the intake hall over the granola bar. 7 months ago. First day. The storm ran its course in 4 hours. She knew it would run its course in approximately 4 hours because the pressure differential that generated it was a feature of the 2 temperature zones and the standard rotation cycle. And she'd calculated the intersection timing from the meteorological data, and the low probability window was, she checked, closing now. The particulate settled. The double moon light came back. Harak Savan removed his hand from her shoulder, where it had been for 4 hours with a weight she'd felt as something more than mass. He moved around to face her, and his bioluminescence was the deepest amber she'd ever seen on him. The amber that didn't have a clean translation. The one she'd been trying to define for 7 months. She thought she had it now. I didn't know this was possible. 15 hours to extraction, she said. We're still ahead of pace. Hour 53. 7 hours out, and the Serath 4 ecosystem made its final argument. Not a predator this time. Not a geological event. Not a storm. 3 other cadets. They came out of the western tree line in rough shape. 2 Thulan females and a male Vethkai. Did the Vethkai, with a torn filtration mask repaired with equipment adhesive and an improvised splint on his lower right limb. Both Thulans moving with the specific careful gait of people whose joints were arguing with them. They were from Team 7. Mara recognized the Vethkai, Skeel Ra, the one from her xenobiology lecture, the one who had gone gold over her notebook. Their signal beacon was dead. Battery failure, Skeel Ra said. His voice was compressed, flat, the Vethkai register that meant he was spending no energy on intonation because he needed it elsewhere. At hour 30, we have been on compass navigation since then. We are, a pause, recalculating. We are approximately 9 kilometers from extraction, by my estimate. Mara checked her map against his position. Adjusted for terrain deviation. 8.5, she said. You've been running true. The older of the two Thulans, grey-skinned, 3 eyes with the sunken look of someone who had been running on reserves, looked at Mara's team and then at Mara and said nothing for a moment. Thulans were not a species that gave observations away cheaply. You look, she said finally, like you have been on a different planet than the one we have been on. Mara thought about the honest response. Considered. I read 11 papers, she said. You want to walk with us? The Thulan looked at the compass in Mara's hand, at the intact equipment, at the thermal wraps visible on the Pelusian's shoulders, at Hrak Sovan's bioluminescence, which was amber, had been amber for hours, had the quality of something settled. Yes, the Thulan said. 7 of them, last 7 hours. The extraction point was a cleared plateau on the northeastern edge of Kerath 4's northern continent, marked with the Academy's standard beacon system. 3 ground lights in a triangular pattern, currently visible from 4 kilometers out. The Academy shuttle was already there when they crested the final ridge. Waiting. The pilot, the Thulan female who'd dropped them 60 hours ago, voice like she'd heard worse, was leaning against the shuttle's exterior doing something with a data tablet. She looked up when the group came into the clearing. She counted. 7. Her tablet went still. She counted again. Then she did something Mara had never seen a Thulan do in 7 months at the Academy. She went visibly, physically still in the way that meant the information had arrived, and the brain was still loading it. Team 4, she said. And 3 of Team 7. Yes, Mara said. Team 7's signal was declared lost at hour 42. The Vethkai repaired his filtration mask with equipment adhesive and held compass navigation for 22 hours. Mara looked at Skeel Ra. You ran almost perfectly true. The gold fired across Skeel Ra's jaw. Not involuntary this time. Deliberate. I see you seeing me. The pilot's tablet lowered slowly. You have all your equipment, plus 7 additional water purification tablets I didn't use, and a length of wire I'll want back from Sector 7 of the northern continent eventually. A long pause. Come aboard, the pilot said. The Academy's debrief process was formal, multi-stage, and conducted by a panel that included Headmaster Dovran Isal, the Thulan, who had read the 43rd letter of appeal and relented and said if they die in the trial, at least they'll stop writing. He read the preliminary after-action within 6 hours of the shuttle landing. He read the individual cadet statements. He read the pilot's incident report, which had, in the section marked observations, a note that said simply, Human cadet appeared relaxed. I do not have a better word for this. Relaxed. He requested a meeting with Cadet Vasquez. She came to his office on a Wednesday. Humans still used Wednesdays, and sat across the desk made of Pelusian moonwood and looked at him with dark eyes that he recognized, after a lifetime of reading Cadets, as the eyes of someone who had been watching you since before you noticed them watching. Your equipment requests were approved because the paperwork was formatted correctly, he said. Yes. The formatting was intentional. Yes. The secondary filtration layer. A pause. It was also a secondary filtration layer. He regarded her. He had, in 60 years of headmastering, produced 311 graduates from first-year trials. The washout rate across those years was 31%. The mortality rate which was not released to cadets, was 6. 6 cadets, in 60 years. None of them human. None of them anything that had come back from Serath 4 relaxed. "Cadet Vasquez," he said, "I am going to ask you a question, and I would appreciate a direct answer." "Sure. Were you afraid?" A pause. Then, so with the honesty that he had come to recognize as the specific quality that made humans either extraordinary or exhausting, depending on which end of it you were on. "Yes." And I was also interested," she said, "and I had enough margin built in that the fear was manageable." She looked at him. "I come from a planet that tried to kill us for 200,000 years. Not metaphorically. Ice ages, megafauna, supervolcanoes, pandemic. All of it. And we," she paused, "found the right word? Persisted. Not because we're brave. Because we read footnotes and we bring extra thermal wraps and we make coffee at 4 in the morning and we put our hands on people's shoulders in storms. A beat. We're very difficult to stop once we've decided to come back." Headmaster Dovrin Isol, 320 years old, looked at her. He thought of the 43 letters of appeal. He thought of the 44, which was still sitting in the administrative queue from Humanities Secondary Council, asking whether provisional status had a defined review timeline. He thought of the way his pilot had written the word relaxed and then written, "I do not have a better word for this because she was a Thulan, and Thulans did not offer insufficient words lightly." He thought of 6 cadets in 60 years. He thought of 7 coming back from a world that had declared 3 of them dead at hour 42. "Your provisional designation," he said, "will be reviewed at the end of this semester." She didn't say finally. He appreciated that. She just nodded, and the dark eyes did the thing they'd been doing since the intake hall. Cataloguing, filing, building the picture. Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "The second-year trials are DHI9. A pause. Then, "I'm going to need more wire." He didn't laugh. Thulans, generally, didn't. But there was something that moved through the room, something in the air pressure that had the quality of laughter without the sound. She stood to leave. "Cadet Vasquez." She turned. "The Keth cadet, Hrak Sovan." He had the after-action on his desk. He'd read the amber bioluminescence note. His first-year evaluation marked him at high risk for crisis failure due to adaptive stress response. He is one of 6 cadets flagged for potential academic separation. She looked at him. "That seems wrong," she said. "Does it?" He held point for 60 hours in a DHI-7 environment and didn't fail once. He ran toward the bad things. She said it simply. The way she said everything simple. He's not a crisis risk. He just needs someone to make it to the ridge with him so he can see the view. A long pause. "I will review his evaluation," Dovrin Isol said. She left. He sat with the file for a long time after. The story that circulated through the Academy's social channels in the days following. Because cadets talked, they always talked, every species talked, gossip was apparently a galactic constant, was not the story of Team 4 completing the Kerath trial. That was remarkable, but it was not the story. The story was this: human cadet comes back from Deathworld, comes back relaxed, comes back with 3 cadets who were declared dead, comes back with her equipment intact, her margins unspent, her coffee tin empty, comes back and immediately, in debrief, flags for academic review the evaluation of a Keth cadet who had been there, who had held, who had run toward the bad things. The story got to Skrix, the Vethkai assistant who had processed the 43rd application without comment and filed it correctly, and who had, in subsequent months, been watching the human cadet with the patient attention of someone who keeps expecting the equation to make sense. Skrix added a line to Mara Vasquez's student file. Not in the official record. In the personal notation field that only Academy staff could read. It said, "I understand now why they kept writing." Hrak Sovan found her in the mess hall that evening, sitting alone at a corner table with her data tablet and what appeared to be, he checked, the first available research paper on DHI-9 worlds, bookmarked already to footnote 3. He sat down. His bioluminescence was amber, the amber that meant I didn't know this was possible. He had decided, somewhere in the last 60 hours, that he would learn to say more things out loud, that the color language of his species was precise and beautiful and also sometimes not enough. Mara, he said. Yeah. My clutch mother asked, when I applied to the academy, what I expected to learn here. He paused. I told her xenobiology and tactical operations. Another pause. I was wrong. She looked up from the paper. What did you learn? She said. He thought about the ridge, the amber light, the 4 hours of hands-on shoulders in the dark, the wire in Sector 7, the instant coffee and the 30-minute rest, and the voice that said, we're coming back, like it was a fact that had already happened and just hadn't caught up yet. That the most dangerous thing on any world, he said, is not the apex predator. She waited. It is the thing that read 11 papers about the apex predator, he said, and came anyway. The dark eyes held for a moment. Then she laughed. A real one, the kind that arrived before she decided to let it. And the sound of it went through the mess hall, and 3 other cadets looked up, and the 2 Thulans from Team 7, who were sitting 3 tables over, went still. In the way Thulans went still when the information had arrived and the brain was still loading it. She turned the data tablet toward him. DHI-9 Environmental Analysis. Footnote 3 already highlighted. I'm going to need a partner, she said. The amber held. I know, said Hraksavan. And somewhere in the administrative annex, under the Pelusian Moonwood desk, and in the 44th letter of appeal from the Human Interplanetary Council, which Headmaster Dovran Isal had not yet opened, not because he was avoiding it, but because he had not needed to, the question answered itself. Provisional, it turned out, had always had a review timeline. It just took the right footnote.